Chapter 22 The Egyptian Plagues. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, When Pharaoh speaks to you, saying, Show a miracle for yourselves, then you shall say to Aaron, Take your rod and cast it before Pharaoh, and let it become a serpent. So Moses and Aaron went in to Pharaoh, and they did so just as the Lord commanded. And Aaron cast down his rod before Pharaoh and before his servants, and it became a serpent. But Pharaoh also called the wise men and the sorcerers. So the magicians of Egypt, they also did in like manner with their enchantments. For every man threw down his rod, and they became serpents. But Aaron's rod swallowed up their rods. And Pharaoh's heart grew hard, and he did not heed them, as the Lord had said. Exodus 7:8-13. Jesus tells us that a wicked generation seeks after a miracle, but God meets the wicked where they are at, and he gives to Pharaoh the miracle of a rod turning into a serpent. Only God has the power to turn a rod into a serpent. It was a miracle that had deep significance to Pharaoh, for it echoes the story of the father of the Egyptian gods, Atum, who would destroy all and turn into a serpent. Satan counterfeits the miracles to give Pharaoh an excuse to discount the sign given by Moses and Aaron. Pharaoh had no faith, so he was always going to find some way to ignore the miracle given, even as the Pharisees found a way to discount the miracles of Jesus and kill him. Then the Lord said to Moses, Tell Aaron, Take your staff and raise your hand over the waters of Egypt, all its rivers, canals, ponds, and all the reservoirs. Turn all the water to blood. Everywhere in Egypt, the water will turn to blood, even the water stored in wooden bowls and stone pots. So Moses and Aaron did just what the Lord commanded them. As Pharaoh and all of his officials watched, Aaron raised his staff and struck the water of the Nile. Suddenly, the whole river turned to blood. The fish in the river died, and the water became so foul that the Egyptians couldn't drink it. There was blood everywhere throughout the land of Egypt. Exodus 7:19-21. Our Father in heaven sustains all creation. He purifies air and water and preserves it for us. When his spirit is withdrawn, then death immediately follows. But if you turn away from them, they panic. When you take away their breath, they die and turn again to dust. When you give them your breath, life is created, and you renew the face of the earth. Psalm 104:29-30. Harpy was the androgynous god of the Nile to the Egyptians. Some of the titles of Harpy were Lord of the Fish and Birds of the Marshes and Lord of the River, bringing vegetation. In Jehovah withdrawing his regenerating power, Harpy became a destroyer of the fish and vegetation. Coming from the rod in Aaron's hand, this represented the power of the God of Israel over one of the most important gods to Egypt. The Hebrew word for blood is used symbolically for grape juice. Jesus turned water to wine as a sweet symbol of the gospel. Like the Jewish leaders who rejected Christ, symbolized by the cursed fig tree which had its life sucked out of it, so the Nile River became the equivalent of the fig tree, its life sucked out of it by the withdrawal of the Spirit of God. The Nile was left desolate. Just as light is generated and darkness is the natural result of the absence of light, so the river becoming blood was a natural result of the absence of the sustaining life of Christ. But why did the waters turn to blood? Why didn't they just stagnate or dry up? The book of Revelation tells us why. Then the second angel poured out his bowl on the sea, and it became blood as of a dead man, and every living creature in the sea died. Then the third angel poured out his bowl on the rivers and springs of water, and they became blood. And I heard the angel of the waters saying, "You are righteous, O Lord, the one who is, and who was, and who is to be, because you have judged these things. For they have shed the blood of saints and prophets, and you have given them blood to drink, for it is their just due." Revelation 16, 3-6. The Egyptians had brutalized the Israelites, killed their infant sons, and thrown them into the river. A later Pharaoh is characterized as a serpent dragon in the river, Ezekiel 29:3, a fitting symbol for a man who headed this work. Now the blood of these infants slain in the rivers came back upon them. God didn't need to arbitrarily turn the water to blood. He simply had to remove his Spirit from it, and the deeds of the past were exposed. God also allowed the waters to manifest in this way because blood is a symbol of the ransom Christ has to pay for the Israelites. Just as Jesus sweated drops of blood on the night before he hung on the cross, so Christ shed drops of blood into the Nile as an indication of his coming passion in the death of the firstborn of Egypt. Satan worked a miracle to replicate the unraveling of nature in the Nile. In doing this, Satan convinced Pharaoh that the God of Moses had acted directly to cause the destruction, while assuring Pharaoh that his own gods still could match the God of Moses. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell Aaron, raise the staff in your hand over all the rivers, canals, and ponds of Egypt, and bring up frogs over all the land." So Aaron raised his hand over the waters of Egypt, and frogs came up and covered the whole land. But the magicians were able to do the same thing with their magic. They too caused frogs to come up on the land of Egypt. Exodus 8, 5-7. Heket was the goddess of fertility, connected to the flooding of the Nile. She is represented in the form of a frog. In the language of Pharaoh, the serpent rod turns Heket into a destroyer. Her fertility goes into overdrive, and frogs are everywhere. The balance of nature, kept in check by the Spirit of God, is released. He sent vast swarms of flies to consume them and hordes of frogs to ruin them. Psalm 78:45. The word for sent in this psalm is in the piel form, which means to let loose, set free, dismiss, or give over. This is important in the context of the earth curse. God did not send the frogs, but rather he let them loose. Secondly, the word for ruin is in the hiphil form, which we know can be translated permitted to ruin. This fits perfectly with God releasing or setting free these plagues to permit them to ruin the Egyptians. This is important with regard to the hedge of protection. God allows part of the wall of protection, which he had been covering with angelic protection, to open. He only opened part of the wall in order to send Pharaoh a warning. Why is it so important to make a distinction between sending frogs and releasing them? Because when we look into the face of Jesus, we see peace, calm, and order. We see waves restrained within their boundaries. The frogs represent chaos and disorder, which comes from a different spirit. The earth itself begins to vomit because of the sins of the people. The frogs are also important because of how they are portrayed in the plagues of Revelation. And I saw 3 evil spirits that looked like frogs leap from the mouths of the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. They are demonic spirits who work miracles and go out to all the rulers of the world to gather them for battle against the Lord on that great judgment day of God the Almighty. Revelation 16:13-14. In God releasing a spirit of disorder into frog reproduction, was he sending a warning that demonic spirits working miracles were about to be unleashed on Egypt? We remember that each time the plagues come, it comes from the rod who was turned into a serpent. Satan, through his agents, counterfeits the frogs, hardening Pharaoh's heart still further. But Satan is clever, because in having his priests produce frogs, Pharaoh is led to believe that God is actively sending frogs to punish him rather than removing his spirit and allowing disorder to reign. It is vital to underscore that the frogs would not have been disordered if the Egyptians had kept God's commandments. The 3rd and 4th plague are of the same process as the plague of the frogs. The psalmist combined them together as being released or set free by God. We remember that Moses had told Pharaoh that if the feast was not kept, God would allow pestilence to manifest. But this pestilence is only a result of the wickedness of the Egyptians. In allowing these plagues in succession, God was actually restricting and limiting that which should have all happened at once. This is how God works with all of us, limiting the number of problems we have that we might learn. If he were to release them all upon us, we would be overwhelmed. And if he did not release any, we would never understand cause and effect, nor choose to be reconciled to him. The interesting point about the plague of lice is that it appeared that the agents of Pharaoh could not replicate it. If Satan could use sorcery to cause snakes and frogs to appear, it would have been easy for him to cause lice to appear if he wanted to. But Satan wanted it to appear that God was a bigger destroyer than himself. It was shown that the work of God was superior to that of Satan. But Satan was leading the people deeper into deception. At the same time, God allows himself to appear as a destroyer so that posterity would finally realize that these attributes reflect human behavior, not divine behavior. The frogs had been annoying, and their stench when they died was uncomfortable. The lice were even more annoying, but the stinging flies were the first to bring pain to the bodies of the Egyptians. Once again, the Hithel form is used, which provides for a context of permission. The Israelites had endured the first 3 plagues with the Egyptians due to their unbelief. But now that the plagues began to affect the bodies of men, the angels of God protect the Israelites. But this time I will spare the region of Goshen, where my people live. No flies will be found there. Then you will know that I am the Lord, and that I am present even in the heart of your land. I will make a clear distinction between my people and your people. This miraculous sign will happen tomorrow. Exodus 8:22-23. It is interesting to note that flies were associated with the Canaanite god Beelzebub, seemingly another name for the god Baal. These were large, venomous flies that inflicted a painful sting, which is entirely characteristic for the Lord of the Flies, Satan. During this plague, Pharaoh begins to show a willingness to listen, proving true of most men what Satan said to God concerning Job. Satan replied to the Lord, "Skin for skin, a man will give up everything he has to save his life." Job 2:4. Pharaoh places restrictions on Moses, commanding that Israel sacrifice in Egypt rather than leaving. Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron. "All right, go ahead and offer sacrifices to your God," he said, "but do it here in this land." Exodus 8:25. But as soon as Moses prayed for the flies to be removed, Pharaoh hardened his heart and changed his mind. The next plague was a plague on all their livestock. We remind ourselves that Egypt had already placed itself where pestilence was certain to come. When God spoke to Israel about the importance of walking in His commandments, He stated the following: "And I will bring a sword against you that will execute the vengeance of the covenant. When you are gathered together within your cities, I will send pestilence among you, and you shall be delivered into the hand of the enemy." Leviticus 26:25. So the next plague prepared to be released in Egypt was God delivering Egypt into the hand of the enemy. "Go back to Pharaoh," the Lord commanded Moses. "Tell him, this is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says: Let my people go so they can worship me. If you continue to hold them and refuse to let them go, the hand of the Lord will strike all your livestock, your horses, donkeys, camels, cattle, sheep, and goats, with a deadly plague. Exodus 9, 1-3. A glance into the face of Jesus, and we don't see him killing horses, donkeys, camels, sheep, and goats with plagues. This is what the Psalms says about how God deals with plagues. Those who live in the shelter of the Most High will find rest in the shadow of the Almighty. This I declare about the Lord. He alone is my refuge, my place of safety. He is my God, and I trust him. For he will rescue you from every trap and protect you from deadly disease. He will cover you with his feathers. He will shelter you with his wings. His faithful promises are your armor and protection. Psalm 91, 1-4. Did God protect the animals of the Israelites with one hand and kill the animals of Egypt with the other? The idea is foolish. Looking to Christ, we see that he restored everything that he touched. Christ is life. He is not the author of disease and death. Once Satan had convinced the Egyptians that God is the one actively bringing these plagues, he now can do his work of destruction with the satisfaction that God will be blamed for it. He just needs to wait for when the breach opens up. As God said to Israel, pestilence is evidence of being handed over to the enemy. Leviticus 26:25. And Satan is our enemy. God protected the Israelites' livestock from the work of Satan in killing all the animals. If Pharaoh had listened to Moses, God could have stopped up the gap in the wall and protected the Egyptians' animals. But when he refused to listen, God hid his face, and almost all the animals died. The sixth plague brought extremely painful boils. The signature of these boils is found in the story of Job. So Satan left the Lord's presence, and he, Satan, struck Job with terrible boils from head to foot. Job scraped his skin with a piece of broken pottery as he sat among the ashes. Job 2, 7-8. This is the only other example we have in the Bible of someone being struck with boils. Job's wife thought God was the one who did this to him. His wife said to him, "Are you still trying to maintain your integrity? Curse God and die." Job 2:9. As we have stated previously, in the case of the Egyptians, these boils came because of breaking God's commandments to such an extent that Satan could attack them. Like the case of Job, God limits the level of affliction the enemy can do. The boils produced a ministration of death, especially for the Egyptian magicians. This plague broke the confidence of the people in their leadership and revealed that they could not protect the people because they also were covered in them. In terms of Christ being crucified in Egypt, in all the affliction of the Egyptians, Christ was afflicted. He felt their intense agony, a type of Christ's agony in Pilate's hall and on the cross. And just like the cross event, Bible readers today consider the Egyptians smitten of God and afflicted, when in reality, Satan had been released to do this work, just as he was the one behind the sufferings of Christ on the cross. Fiery hail is the next plague, and we have clear evidence in this plague of satanic activity. He gave up, Hiphil, their cattle also to the hail, and their flocks to hot thunderbolts. He cast upon them the fierceness of his anger, wrath, and indignation, and trouble, by sending evil angels among them. Psalm 78, 48-49. The KJV correctly translates the Hiphil as permissive, gave up. The same verb form occurs in Exodus and can be translated the same way, proving that Psalm 78:48 and Exodus 9:18 will harmonize together when using the permissive context. So tomorrow at this time I will send, permit, Hiphil, a hailstorm more devastating than any in all the history of Egypt. Exodus 9:18. Psalms 78:49 states that it is evil angels that are released upon Egypt. But several translations obscure the fact that evil angels were bringing the hail. He cast on them the fierceness of his anger, wrath, indignation, and trouble by sending angels of destruction among them. Psalm 78:49, New King James. He unleashed against them his hot anger, his wrath, indignation, and hostility, a band of destroying angels. Psalm 78:49, NIV. But the word in Hebrew is evil and is used in the phrase, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The book of Psalms tells us plainly that God's anger has been activated, meaning his sorrowful withdrawal, allowing evil angels to do their work. It also tells us that God gave up the cattle to the hail, rather than he directly sending the hail. This detail is important. This is why our dear Father in heaven was concerned for the herdsmen and the cattle. So tomorrow, at this time, I will send a hailstorm more devastating than any in all the history of Egypt. Quick, order your livestock and servants to come in from the fields to find shelter. Any person or animal left outside will die when the hail falls. Some of Pharaoh's officials were afraid because of what the Lord had said. They quickly brought their servants and livestock in from the fields. Exodus 9:18-20. If God wanted to punish Egypt, then why is he trying to save the herdsmen and cattle? This makes perfect sense when we see that evil angels are assembling to bring destruction. God continues to try to save while Satan does his work of destruction. When we read the Bible carefully and look at all that it says, the picture starts to change, and we see Satan revealed for the murderer that he is. Let's just run through our tools again as we read about the hail. Reading this passage outside the character of Christ, we only see a vengeful, angry God destroying those who disobey him. Looking into the face of Christ, we begin to discover more texts that reveal evil angels are involved in the process. The wording of Bible texts becomes clearer. We see the hiding of the face of God, and Satan is revealed as the one engaged in destruction. We realize the reason they are released is because the angel hedge has been broken down through the Egyptians breaking God's commandments. This process becomes easier with each application of the principles. Knowing that Christ was crucified in Egypt according to Revelation 11:8, we search for more connections. All the flax and barley were ruined by the hail, because the barley had formed heads and the flax was budding. Exodus 9:31. Barley is the crop waved as the first fruit offering during Passover. The following verse tells us who the first fruits represent. But each one in his own order, Christ the first fruits, afterward those who are Christ's at his coming. 1 Corinthians 15:23. The smashing of the barley crop represents the crushing of Christ as he is afflicted in the affliction of the Egyptians. Our hearts are moved at the thought of Christ's suffering. We begin to see the cross in a much deeper light. We see how his pain is extended across time. He wants us to know this, but he also doesn't want to force us to know this. The Spirit of God pleads with us to give up our natural desire for sacrifice and offering to appease human perceptions of justice. Our desire for vengeance hurts him, but Jesus will not demand that we let it go against our will, but hopes to awaken to us the value of love and forgiveness. If we search for more connections regarding hail, we discover gems like this in the Psalms. One of the reasons we look to the Psalms is that Jesus specifically mentions that the Psalms speak of him. Then he said, "When I was with you before, I told you that everything written about me in the law of Moses and the prophets and in the Psalms must be fulfilled." Luke 24:44. In Psalm 18, we find a reference to fiery hail. The opening part of the psalm speaks of Christ's wrestle leading up to the cross. "I called on the Lord, who is worthy of praise, and he saved me from my enemies. The ropes of death entangled me. Floods of destruction swept over me. The grave wrapped its ropes around me. Death laid a trap in my path. But in my distress, I cried out to the Lord. Yes, I prayed to my God for help. He heard me from his sanctuary. My cry to him reached his ears." Psalm 18:3-6. What follows next is a description of God's reaction. "Then the earth quaked and trembled. The foundations of the mountains shook. They quaked because of his anger. Smoke poured from his nostrils. Fierce flames leaped from his mouth. Glowing coals blazed forth from him. He opened the heavens and came down. Dark storm clouds were beneath his feet. Mounted on a mighty angelic being, he flew, soaring on the wings of the wind. He shrouded himself in darkness, veiling his approach with dark rain clouds. Thick clouds shielded the brightness around him and rained down hail and burning coals. The Lord thundered from heaven. The voice of the Most High resounded amid the hail and burning coals. Psalm 18, 7-13. The shaking of the earth reminds us of the earthquake during the crucifixion of Jesus. The darkness indicated suggests the terrible darkness around the cross that lasted from noon to 3 p.m., Luke 23:44, revealing the Father's presence at the cross shrouded in darkness. There is much more that we could explore here, but we make the point that the true understanding of the cross connects many portions of Scripture that had remained obscure previously. The plague of hail is connected to the cross event, causing us to realize more and more that the cross of Christ is the key to unlocking all the mysteries of the Bible where God previously appeared to be fearfully violent. It is the key to understanding his relationship with the world and how everything goes through his Son, Jesus. Locusts decimated Egypt in the 8th plague. After the fiery hail had smashed everything, the locusts removed everything green from Egypt. In the book of Revelation, the 5th trumpet speaks of a horde of locusts. The leader of the locusts is identified as Apollyon, the destroyer. The locusts looked like horses prepared for battle. They had what looked like gold crowns on their heads, and their faces looked like human faces. They had hair like women's hair and teeth like the teeth of a lion. They wore armor made of iron, and their wings roared like an army of chariots rushing into battle. They had tails that stung like scorpions, and for 5 months they had the power to torment people. Their king is the angel from the bottomless pit. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek, Apollyon, the destroyer. Revelation 9, 7-11. An east wind brought the locusts into Egypt. So Moses raised his staff over Egypt, and the Lord caused an east wind to blow over the land all that day and through the night. When morning arrived, the east wind had brought the locusts. Exodus 10:13. The angel hedge, which held back the winds of strife, was released, and Satan, the destroyer, stripped away all hope from Egypt. Then I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds, so they did not blow on the earth or the sea, or even on any tree. Revelation 7:1. The hearers of the word who are not doers, James 1:23, will read this as God personally sending the locusts. But the Bible indicates that Egypt was given over to the locusts. He delivered up, gave over their crops to caterpillars. Their harvest was consumed by locusts. Psalm 78:46. This is confirmed again by a permissive use of the Hiphil Hebrew form. Or else, if you refuse to let my people go, behold, tomorrow I will permit, Hiphil, locusts into your territory. Exodus 10:4. Pharaoh's officials begged him to let the Israelites go, as they could see that Egypt was in ruins. Pharaoh's officials now came to Pharaoh and appealed to him. How long will you let this man hold us hostage? Let the men go to worship the Lord their God. Don't you realize that Egypt lies in ruins? Exodus 10:7. Green is a symbol of life and hope. The locusts extinguished all hope for Egypt, preparing them to descend into the deep, dark depression of the 9th plague. Satan tried to extinguish all hope in Christ as he hung upon the cross. He reminded Christ that all the disciples had forsaken him. All the nation had turned against him. The night before he was crucified, his disciples argued about who was the greatest. All hope seemed gone except for 2 green shoots found in an adulteress and a thief. Mary had anointed his feet, and the thief on the cross asked Jesus to remember him when Christ came into his kingdom. This small amount of light for Christ is symbolized by the flicker of light in the homes of the Israelites during the plague of darkness. So Moses stretched out his hand toward heaven, and there was thick darkness in all the land of Egypt 3 days. They did not see one another, nor did anyone rise from his place for 3 days. But all the children of Israel had light in their dwellings. Exodus 10:22-23. Darkness is the power of Satan. Acts 26:18. God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. 1 John 1:5. The sufferings of Christ through the decimation of Egypt caused him terrible grief. Just as Christ was covered by darkness on the cross, so Egypt was covered in darkness right before the death of their firstborn. By this time it was about noon, and darkness fell across the whole land until 3 o'clock. Luke 23:44. Looking into the Old Covenant mirror, one of the most powerful gods in Egypt had turned his back on Egypt and left them in darkness. In the hands of Moses, it represents Jehovah's defeat of their protector, Amun-Ra. In the New Covenant mirror, Christ is covered in darkness as he suffers with his Egyptian children. Christ does not leave them nor forsake them. He feels their depression, sorrow, and pain. Satan shrouds Egypt in darkness and prepares himself to inflict his most deadly strike against them in the 10th plague. Does the world learn nothing from the story of the darkness in Egypt? Apparently not. Then the 5th angel poured out his bowl on the throne of the beast, and his kingdom was plunged into darkness. His subjects ground their teeth in anguish and they cursed the God of heaven for their pains and sores. But they did not repent of their evil deeds and turn to God. Revelation 16:10-11. Egypt did not repent either. Thus many had to walk the Egyptian Via Dolorosa, to be crucified spiritually on the left and right side of the person of Christ. In their dying moments, most of those suffering under the final plagues in Revelation will curse Christ. But some of them will say to Jesus, "Please remember me when you come in your kingdom." The same will happen in the last days of Earth's history. The kings of the earth will enslave the world and grind them with tyranny. The feeble saints among them will cry to the Lord of Sabaoth, "Come now, you rich, weep and howl for your miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver are corroded, and their corrosion will be a witness against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. You have heaped up treasure in the last days. Indeed, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, cry out, and the cries of the reapers have reached the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. You have lived on the earth in pleasure and luxury. You have fattened your hearts as in a day of slaughter. You have condemned, you have murdered the just. He does not resist you. Therefore be patient, brethren, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, waiting patiently for it until it receives the early and latter rain. You also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. James 5:1-8. None of these 9 plagues could cause Pharaoh to give up his slaves. This assures us that calamity is not enough to release the human heart from its slavery to sin. In a later period, Israel had a similar response to the Egyptians, showing that we are all of the same nature. Oh, what a sinful nation they are, loaded down with a burden of guilt. They are evil people, corrupt children who have rejected the Lord. They have despised the Holy One of Israel and turned their backs on him. Why do you continue to invite punishment? Must you rebel forever? Your head is injured and your heart is sick. You are battered from head to foot, covered with bruises, welts, and infected wounds, without any soothing ointments or bandages. Your country lies in ruins, and your towns are burned. Foreigners plunder your fields before your eyes and destroy everything they see. Isaiah 1:4-7. Only the death of the firstborn son of the king could satisfy the mind of Pharaoh that was fully under the control of Satan. If the firstborn of the lower ranks of Egypt had been slain, it would not have been enough to move the king's heart. The death of the king's son alone could do it.